I know a lot of people say you have to be passionate about your work, which, I mean, I agree. But I just think we have to be careful when we talk about passion and science, because a lot of it can just be hidden ambition of how you really want to get those publications. You really want to get that grant. You really want to get those results because you're always working towards the next step, next level.
Welcome to Task Time Energy, the purpose-filled productivity podcast, where we sometimes talk about time management skills and productivity techniques, but more often we talk a little more philosophically about how we think about time and how we perceive time and ways that we can use the time that we have in a purposeful and fulfilling way. My name's Scott Miller. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everyone. Our guest today is Dr. Susan Fetics. Sue is an international biochemist who has performed experiments in the lab for 25 years. She's worked in chemistry, genetics, and structural biology and has published in all three fields. Sue is a Marie Curie Actions Fellow alumna and a founding member of Women in Research Ireland, a charity based in Dublin which uses its established platform to host free monthly events for the unheard voices of women, minorities, and other underrepresented groups in research and academia. So, Sue, it is wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, and very nice to meet you in person finally.
Yeah.
On this trip.
Yeah, this is fun. So, as I've told you, this podcast is kind of a catch-all for different topics related to time. And we've had some really interesting conversations with people who've had different experiences and different ways of looking at time and thinking about time. So sometimes we talk about time management tips and techniques, talk with people especially people who've had kind of challenging academic lives or have challenging careers and have really had to find creative ways of managing their time, but, very open to whatever people want to talk about. And I know you've had some really interesting experiences. So things like getting your PhD, things like working in a lab for 25 years, living in Ireland, and getting that perspective of, growing up here in the U.S., living here in the U.S. for a large part of your life. And now you've been living in Ireland for the last 10 years. Is that right?
7, yeah.
7 years. Okay.
Europe for 10.
Europe for 10. Okay. So any of that I think would be really interesting to talk about. Any thoughts on a good place to start?
Well, definitely the being a biochemist and the experiments in the lab. Sometimes you are just at the mercy of the samples. Mm-hmm. So whether your protein is ready at 5 o'clock and it's only viable, say, for 5 hours, and that's when you have to do all your experiments, and you're not getting out until 10 p.m. And you just have to watch the time and go with that. And then, the next day maybe you can take a break, have it easier because you're going so late, but that's at least working with live biologicals. You're kind of at the mercy of when the samples are ready and what results you need to get.
You talked about catching up the next day, and just to let people know what inspired some of this conversation. So my wife, Lauren, was getting her master's degree at the same time that you were getting your PhD, and that's how the two of you met. And she had mentioned things like, at 10 o'clock at night, you saying, oh, wait, I got to go to the lab. I'll be back in a little while. Is there any, did you find that was difficult to do, or anything that you had to do to be able to manage your schedule, like creatively, when you're having to do things like, like that?
No, because my career was always my top priority. Mm-hmm. I was just very driven and very ambitious, and I was determined to get the best results no matter what. So even lots of times during my 3rd year, I adopted a little Yorkie dog. So when I would go home for dinner, if I had to go back at 10 at night or midnight, I would bring her with me and let her roam around the lab while I was checking to see that the HPLC was still working, or sometimes just seeing that, your samples are still spinning or they look okay. Sometimes you do have to work until 10 or midnight. And then the next day, you can sleep in a little bit and come in a bit later. So you work 10, 12 hours one day, and then you can shave off a couple hours the next day, at least not go in so early in the morning. But overall, biochemistry scientists, you're working much more than 40 hours a week. It's much closer to 10 hours a day, at least 6 days a week, sometimes 7.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that the people who succeed in that kind of environment are, like you were describing, just really driven and motivated to succeed no matter what, willing to do whatever was necessary to succeed? Are those the kind of people that tend to succeed in that kind of environment?
So the protein I was working on was a cancer protein. So you synthetically produce the protein using bacteria, but it's identical to the proteins you find in human cells. But then once the protein is produced, it's outside of the cell. So you need to trick it to think that it's still inside the cell and keep it viable, because that's when you're going to do your testings, take your measurements, so that it's valid, as if it's inside the cell. So that has to become the priority in order to succeed. Because say you produce a sample and it's only viable for 5 hours, and 5 hours and 1 minute, you know that you're not even going to be able to take a measurement. That's where you have to just adjust your life around that. So you have to be driven. You have to be interested. I know a lot of people say you have to be passionate about your work, which, I mean, I agree. But I just think we have to be careful when we talk about passion and science, because a lot of it can just be hidden ambition of how you really want to get those publications. You really want to get that grant. You really want to get those results, because you're always working towards the next step, next level.
It was very interesting what you were saying a moment ago about the difference between passion and ambition. Well, how would you describe the difference between those two?
I'm still figuring that out. Passion is definitely more emotional, emotionally invested, and nothing will stop you from doing it. And that's where ambitious can be very similar to that. But being ambitious is more ego-driven. And like I said, thinking more of the outcome of how this will look to others, especially in the academic field, because it's so important to have, a grant that's, at least worth 6 figures, possibly 7 figures, and the publications that go with it, and the impact factor of the journal that you're publishing in, and how successful all the experiments are. So in science, we need to be so logical. They encourage emotion and passion, all that, but if you're not logical about it, you can burn out. So I think everyone for themselves has to decide. And that's why I'll probably spend the rest of my life even still figuring that out. But I know, like during my PhD and those first research positions after the PhD, it was blurred lines between ambition and passion. Because, of course, I do enjoy learning and discovering with the experiments I was doing. You're learning about life. You're learning about biology and what's happening, and possibly understanding diseases better for cures and for better treatments of them. But yeah, you can't sacrifice too much of your own life for that, such as having to go in every midnight to check on samples when you need to have a proper work-life balance.
It sounds like you're saying that in your experience, passion is a little bit more internally focused and emotionally focused. Maybe people doing things for their own satisfaction, their own desires, whereas what you're describing as ambition is more externally focused, looking for the recognition, looking for the publication, and getting the grants and getting the prestige. You also mentioned something about being logical and how that helped people avoid burning out. Yeah.
Well, taking a closer look, how much time are you spending, and during your downtime, are you really regenerating, your energy? Are you enjoying your downtime? Because lots of times when you are at the mercy of the clock and having to go in at different hours, or I used to have to work 24-hour shifts, is the time outside of work spent not creatively? Is it spent in a healthy way where you're actually regenerating energy, or are you just so exhausted that you just become a vegetable and you can just stay in that vegetative state until the work starts again when your alarm goes off the next morning? Yeah.
It seems like today, especially, staying in that vegetative state is very easy because we have our phones, we have our Netflix, and a friend of mine, Matt, I did an episode with him recently, and he was talking about that, saying, what do people do when they get bored? They get on their phones or they eat. He was also talking about really having to make an effort to have healthy habits and healthy activities outside of work.
Well, I've heard about, I learned this like 20 years ago, active versus passive activities or hobbies. Mm-hmm. So a perfect example is, you're tired or you need some downtime. You go watch TV or you go to a movie or something like that. And that's passive. Mm-hmm. So you're not engaging, like you're inputting from the TV or from the screen. Mm-hmm. Active is more like reading or doing a puzzle. Mm-hmm. Cross-stitching, I used to do sometimes. Painting, if you can. Mm-hmm. Going for a walk is definitely active. And doing the active hobbies are more healthy and more beneficial for your brain circuitry, for serotonin, dopamine, all the good hormones, versus passive, where you're just ingesting, which, I mean, we all need that. We all need to come home and just turn on the boob tube and watch and binge on something or watch movies. But you just have to be careful if you're crossing a line that it's happening too much, because then that actually feeds into the depression. So just keep an eye on whether your activities are active or passive and how much you're giving to each.
Yeah, interesting. That almost exactly parallels what my friend Matt was saying. He was talking, because Matt now lives in Alaska, pretty far north, not above the Arctic Circle where it's like completely dark for 6 months. But, they get in the middle of winter. He was saying it gets light at like 11 o'clock in the morning and they get 6 hours of daylight. And he was talking about how almost the exact same thing, how it is easy sometimes to fall into those passive habits of, the phone or whatever. But he was talking about how active habits like, skiing, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling, things like that, make a really big difference. He was saying for him and his wife and for other people that they've seen where those active habits really have a positive impact in helping people deal with the decreased daylight and the longer darkness.
Well, one of the things I would add as a scientist, it's very physically demanding, which is one of the things I absolutely loved about being a scientist, because when I was starting my career and early in my 20s, a lot of my friends who are not scientists, they're sitting at a desk all day and I'm, moving rotors that are 50 pounds and I'm doing this and it's very active. You forgot you left something on the Bunsen burner and you got to run to go get it. But then of course there are times where you have to sit at your computer and write reports or put presentations together or reply to emails. So during my career, I've loved that it's actually quite active. And I think that's been very healthy, just even for, my physical fitness. But what you're talking about, like cross country or those active hobbies, scientists like me, I mean, I'm not doing that after a full day of work. So that's where it's relative, the active versus passive. After a exhausting week, I worked 60 hours in the past 4 days. I mean, a walk is enough activity that I can take, and that even, consciously be breathing. So there's limitations because it can be so physically demanding. Right. You're not always available to do all the things that you want to do for to keep active and have your brain be in, a happy state. Yeah. So I guess just also monitoring that.
Yeah. What I was going to ask you, what are some of the other activities that you found have been helpful for that?
Well, first thing I started doing, I got my master's when I was 23. And then that's when I started working full time. And I started doing yoga because I had just always wanted to and never had the chance. And I thought, I'll get a video and I'll start doing yoga. And so that's active because you're actively engaging, with your body, which is the best thing that you can be doing. But it's calming. It's soothing in a way. So again, low impact. So yoga I started doing in 1999 and I'm doing it on and off ever since. I like to swim. Reading, my first job, it was an hour each way on the subway. So I read a book a week because I was on the train 10 hours a week. And in New York, I had an active social life. So going out with friends, I'm learning more and more human connection and feeling safe in the human connections. Quality, not quantity, is super important. So that's one of the best things that you can do for yourself. So I would even say that's a hobby of mine, or I make sure that my life is full of that, having connections with others that are people that are meaningful to me. And I guess then the usual, I remember one time I took an art class, painting, one time rock climbing. It was like for women, so because we can feel safe, so we don't. So a bunch of different things like, bike. I love riding my bike, yeah.
It's interesting you talked about reading on the subway. Something I've noticed is I love to read. And, when I was younger, when I was a kid, I was devouring books. And I've noticed I got into a habit where I was still reading because I love to read, but I was reading a lot of stuff on the internet, which is really just short bursts of, whatever's on the internet. And I'm wondering about that, like how much of a difference in terms of what you're talking about, activities that we're really engaging with, as opposed to just like absorbing something like coming out of the television. That may be a really important difference is in what are you reading? Because it is so easy these days to just grab your phone and start reading an article or something instead of picking up a book. It seems like that would make a difference in the quality, like you're talking about the quality of the activity.
Right. So when I was in my 20s in New York, that's when there were bookstores everywhere. And in the windows were the books. So I didn't even have to look for titles. I could just walk into any little Barnes & Noble. Wasn't as big as it is now, but the little bookshops. And in the window, there would be 3 or 4 books that just were so interesting that's how I would even discover books by what was on the shelves and what was being promoted by the new authors. But I no longer have a long commute. What I do is I'll take a weekend and I'll read a book. So the last book I read in April was Tori Amos's Resistance, which is I highly recommend if you're a Tori Amos fan. She tells the stories behind her songs and what was happening in her life. And she grew up right outside Washington, D.C. Wow. So a lot of politics going on because she was a piano bar singer. Lounge singer. So I do, it's almost binging. Like I'll say this weekend, I'm going to read this book and I do it. So I'll read it. So instead of the 10 hours, instead of taking it over 5 days, 2 hours a day, I'll use that weekend and it's done in 24, 48 hours. So I don't know if that's been influenced by, the short sound bites that you read. Or if that's just now, this is a different lifestyle with a different work situation. Yeah, it sounds like, so you're in a situation where you're working hard, you're working long hours, and maybe because of that, or just, your natural tendency, it sounds like you're very mindful about how you spend your time off, how you spend your leisure time. And it sounds like you're also very maybe protectful of that or protective of that, where, it has a lot of value to you. Would you say that? Does that sound right? Yeah, because I didn't value it before. Or I didn't value it because I didn't have the energy to value it. I definitely, with certain jobs and certain research projects, have been so physically demanding. And also having research projects that involve global collaborations. So that means dealing with people in all different time zones. And having to report to different people at different types and different levels, that my downtime, I would fall into that trap that I was talking about, where you're just so exhausted, you just want to stream. My thing is like Hallmark rom-com movies, and go out for a low-key walk. And I was not fully recovered by the time I had to go to work next. So that's where now that I've taken a step back from that, I be more conscious. At the time, I was always trying to correct it, but it just was kind of the lifestyle that I had gotten myself into, that eventually I needed the red flag to say that you need to tone it down and be more mindful and have more value in the time that I take for myself. Yeah. Have you seen any, can you think back to any specific examples of how you've seen that, that self-care, right? That being mindful of how you spend your off time has had a positive impact on your productivity or your creativity. And just where this is coming from is because it is so easy. There are so many people these days who are always plugged in, and they've got messages or emails or notifications popping up on their phone and on their days off or after hours. And, we get drawn into this almost cycle of we're never off. And what I wonder a lot from talking to people, and even from seeing myself when I've been in that kind of mindset, which I have from time to time,
you think you're being so productive, right? Oh yeah, I'm always, email me anytime, or, my boss can get a hold of me 24/7, and that's what my boss expects, those kind of things. And yet it does have, after a while, a negative impact on productivity and creativity. And I think people maybe don't recognize it or talk themselves out of believing that it's actually negatively impacting them. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So one of my passions I love to do that I've been doing for over 20 years is public outreach. So I've done it in the States, I've done it in France, and I've done it in Ireland, where I volunteer, at a booth or something to teach kids at like a science fair or something. So a perfect example is I was in France, and as a structural biologist, my specialty is crystallography. So I isolate a protein and I'm trying to crystallize it. And so I was there for 2 years and no luck. Nothing was working. And I just thought, my contract is ending in a few months. Not going to get my desired results. Hopefully get some publication out of this, but not the ultimate goal that I wanted. Well, it was a Saturday. And in France, in October, it's the Science Festival des Sciences, Festival of Sciences. And I had volunteered that day, that afternoon, I was going to go and have the kids grow lysozyme crystals because they grow at room temperature. And so I was looking forward to the afternoon. But when I woke up and I was all chill and sleeping in a bit because I knew it was going to be a long afternoon working with the kids, that's when I had the idea about ordering a specific peptide that I can then bind to a protein to grow a crystal. And even on that side, like I emailed my boss. I'm like, hey, what about, this thing that I haven't tried yet? And we ordered it and it was in a couple weeks. And then I had my crystal in a couple weeks. So after 2 years. So I definitely think that there was a correlation there, that I woke up on a Saturday and I was really looking forward to working with the kids. This is something that I've been doing for so long and I really enjoy it. So like my brain was in a creative, happy place, like that circuitry was working. And then that just somehow, after 2 years, where I'm working constantly and in the lab and reading papers, why didn't this work? Why didn't that work? All these different things. And then just, that eureka moment, something came to me. And then that's what worked to get my 1.89 angstrom crystal. So that's good resolution.
Yeah. Well, it's a great example of the value and the importance of downtime, getting away from work, whether that's, whatever you're doing to relax and get away from it. It reminds me of some research I was reading about. So when I was teaching prep courses for the LSAT, and people are like working really hard to prepare for this very difficult exam. And so the company I was working for, we were always very interested in, learning science and some of the latest research. And I remember one of the things I was looking at was they were talking about the difference between focused and I think it's diffuse thinking. So focused thinking is when you're actually actively thinking about a task, working on a task. And then diffuse thinking mode is when you're not. So one example they gave was, I think Thomas Edison would sit at his chair with a couple of ball bearings in his hand. And just as he was starting to fall asleep, nod off, the ball bearings would drop onto the floor and wake him up. And that was how he came up with some of his best ideas, was by sitting and just relaxing. And one of the I guess recommendations that came out of that research that I was reading was that it's actually important when you're studying something to take a day off. And I used to tell my students this all the time, take at least one day off a week when you don't study the LSAT at all. Because apparently our brains need that time to make connections and do some of the work that our brain does in the background. And it just, what you were talking about just reminded me of that.
Yeah, I also find that with writing, writing either publications or grants where you're trying to get funding. I'll write for 2 or 3 days in a row. And of course the deadline is looming, but I try to time it so that I get a day at least in there to just put it down, and not look at it and then go back. And then all these ideas come to me, like a thesaurus and all these, better adjectives and stuff that then it really pumps up the writing. And if I had just kept doing it days and days in a row, it kind of loses its luster.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that you plan for that, because I think that's the hard part for a lot of people. I'm just, again, thinking back to my LSAT students, their test date is coming up and, people are telling me I'm really burned out, like my scores have plateaued. And I'd say, I'd ask them, when is the last time you've taken a day off completely from studying? And they'd say, oh, I think it's been a few months. Like, you have to do that. Right. And it's hard with the deadline looming, but if you can plan for that, and just same thing in our daily lives. If you have somebody who has a really demanding career, being mindful and intentional about this and planning that into your routine so that you don't get to that, don't get to that point where you're completely burned out, but also B, give your brain that downtime that it needs to make those new connections and, then come back to your work fresh. I'm thinking of Leonardo da Vinci had a quote about that. Oh. Something about, every once in a while, step away from your work, and the farther away, the better. Yeah. And when you come back, you'll see it from a new perspective. Like, that's not the exact quote, but something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm thinking as we're talking about this, of saying it's kind of a joke, but not really. Like, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken much better care of myself. Yeah. Because as, we see people as you get older, there are certain people who are still able to be active, still able to go out and do the things they enjoy doing and live life the way they want to. And other people who are not as capable of doing that because they haven't taken as good care of themselves. But I think when you're younger, I can think of myself in my 20s, that was a bit more of a far off, concept. But when you start talking about how it can actually, like, the better you take care of yourself, building some of these healthy habits, it does have an immediate effect right now in your ability to enjoy life and your ability to, if you are really ambitious, meet those goals. It seems like there's a lot of benefit from thinking about that, because it can be more immediate for somebody who's thinking, oh yeah, I have plenty of time before I'm old and have to take care of myself.
Well, that's why when I was 27, I was diagnosed with a bladder condition called interstitial cystitis, and they don't know what causes it and there's no cure, but ulcers form naturally on the inside of your bladder, which is quite painful. I didn't know it was happening. Eventually I was diagnosed by a urologist. And so I had to go through a treatment, but then the doctor was very clear, yes, you're going to have this treatment and that will hopefully help, but now for the rest of your life, your diet is what's going to make the difference. Mm-hmm. And so immediately, no more alcohol, no more caffeine, sodas, juices. Think about it. They're all irritating because they're liquids. They're going straight to the bladder. So those all went out the window. And then to reduce the acid that I'm ingesting, raw vegetables, spinach, kale, avocado. So for the past 20 years, I've been doing this diet that I felt I didn't have a choice because I was scared. I was 27. Yeah. And 2002, the internet is not what it is today. So you couldn't just Google, which was probably a good thing. So I just listened to my doctor, and I remember getting pamphlets and support groups. And everything was saying, do this diet where you stick with a lot of, fruits and vegetables. Because when you cook things, that's when you cook out the proteins and they become more acidic. Mm-hmm. And also, I had somewhere, when I was really getting into the diet and living healthy through food, I had read, you want fruits and, nuts, seeds and nuts. And if you think about it, a seed, so I have pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds, and flax seeds is also another good one. A seed has everything in it that will have the sunflower grow or the pumpkin grow. So that's pretty powerful. Yeah. So that's why I started just sprinkling pumpkin and sunflower seeds on my salad. And now I always have salad so frequently it can be there. But I even tell people who don't eat salads, like my mother, or if I'm trying to give somebody I care about advice, or eat them either raw or just sprinkle them on something, because the seed contains everything, that will fight viruses, that will push it through the dirt and push the plant towards the sun, the leaves. So that's pretty powerful. Yeah. So that's why, just as a biochemist, I was kind of studying diet and just thinking of how this was affecting my cells in my body. Mm-hmm. So because if I didn't do the diet like this, I was going to be in chronic pain where I was not going to be able to get out of bed and going on disability. And for me, that just wasn't an option because I was young and I felt healthy and I felt empowered. And as soon as I was diagnosed, I immediately the voice inside me just said, you're not gonna lose out. So I was determined to do whatever it took. So that's also just my personal story of how now all these years later, the diet has been a priority. And I really think that has helped me keep in such good shape and mental shape and physical shape, and has helped me take the time that it's like, okay, I need to cook. As I was saying earlier, you can be exhausted from the bench work in the lab, but I needed energy to cook, make my salads for the week, make the fillet of salmon I'm going to eat for the whole week. Because if I don't, I'm going to be in chronic pain across my whole pelvis, and then I can't do my job or live an enjoyable life. And I just refuse to live like that. So that's why I've been at the mercy of making time to eat healthy and consciously.
Yeah. I mean, some people are, like you've said, completely incapacitated by that condition. And so you made the choice to have that discipline, that more strict diet, which has allowed you to live the life that you want to live and keep that under control. But also it sounds like having these healthy habits, this healthy diet, has also had a lot of other positive impacts on your life and your work.
Yeah, that was unexpected. Yeah. And I know, because I know other people that have what I have. It's primarily women. And yes, I made a choice and it worked for me. And even, when was it? About 8-9 months ago, seeing a urologist, because I was like, am I okay? Because the treatment was so long ago and I'm just not, I'm just living now. And yeah, the doctor was kind of like, go away. You're fine. Yeah. They don't use the word cured, but you're set. You're doing okay. Just keep doing what you're doing and don't come back here because you don't have any problems. It was almost, like I was certain. I'm like, it's been 20 years. Something's wrong, right? And not. But I've met other women who have made the choice like me and are determined. And for whatever reason, they are, it can cause a lot of depression. And you don't want to get out of bed, and anxiety because it is worrying about using the restroom and how much is going to impact your social life. And they just can't get out of it. So I don't know what the answer is. Like, why am I so special? I do think that's why I think within the last year I was going back to a urologist for really no reason. I just was like, it's been 19 years and I can't have fixed this. And the doctor was pretty much like, yeah, get out of here. You did. Because I see it on social media and I know people and they just can't get over the hurdle of this bladder condition that's bothering them. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the magic pill is because certainly people are doing the same diet that I am. I don't know if it's, I would not say that I'm more determined than them. I'm sure they are as determined as I have been this whole time to conquer this and to live as normal a life that they can. So, I mean, it's one of those still trying to figure out what causes the disease and what changes to make within yourself to do it. I think just medicine today doesn't fully understand these diseases. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done on how to cure yourself of these diseases.
There's a question I've been asking everyone at the end of this.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you the same question. Huh? What is your dream right now?
Yeah, I know. It's funny because my dream is very different than it has been at any other point in my life. At other points in my life, I've always been very clear, such as I want to move to France. I want to do a biochemistry project. I want to enjoy weekends in Paris. I want to meet cool people and I want to enjoy myself. And my dreams have been very concrete and they've always come true. That's one thing I have to say. All of my dreams have come true, which is pretty incredible. And now rewriting a list of dreams or just shaping what my life should be at the age of 47, it's more abstract. So I can't say it's based on a location or on certain weather or a certain job that I have to be doing. I'm doing my best to get away from the logical scientist that I've been my entire life. Well, at least a paid scientist since I was a chemist at 19. and just go with my feelings. And this is something that it's funny you're asking. Yeah. For the past 2.5 weeks, 1 week here in the States, and then right before I was coming over, just what are my feelings telling me? What emotions are driving me right now? And it really is to be happy, which I know happy is relative. Happy is not this abstract thing that everything is perfect. Happy to me at least means balance, huge self-awareness, and then awareness of the surroundings. So definitely just be happy within myself, which then, will attract happy relationships with the people I have in my life. And at the same time that I want that, just have a good work-life balance, which, being honest with myself, 25 years in a lab, I never had. But that's because when I was 19 and got that first job, I just loved it so much and I was doing well. And my boss just constantly supported me and said, "You're amazing." That how could I not just want to live to do that work? And unfortunately, it just kind of trickled the other 24 years of my career. But now I'm taking a step back and I really want to do my best to have that good work-life balance where, as you were saying, be productive, even though I'm not doing the 60 hours a week, like be productive with the 40-hour week as much as I thought I would have been during a 60 or 70-hour week and doing these 24-hour shifts. Mm-hmm. So that's the dream. Is I've traveled a lot and lived in different places. And now the dream is I'll see where I end up location-wise, but happy and having a good work-life balance, and then having safe, healthy connections with people in my life and animals. I love dogs. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah. We'll see.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, thanks for doing this. Appreciate having you here.
Thanks for asking.
All right. If you'd like to talk with Sue about her research or any of her other work, you can reach her through LinkedIn. Her profile is at linkedin.com/in/Susan K. Fetics. That's Fetics. I'm also happy to pass a message along to her if you want to email me. It's scott@scottmillercoaching.com. You can also email me if you're looking for ways to improve your own work-life balance, or if you're looking for ways to develop healthy habits that will improve your productivity and your creativity. When I'm working with someone as their coach, those are the kind of things that I really love talking about, and I love helping people bring more of that into their lives. So again, you can reach me by email, scott@scottmillercoaching.com, or you can find more information on my website, scottmillercoaching.com. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you again soon.